Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg, here to do a Friday Reads. Another Friday Reads that I am going to post on a Saturday, which just is the way it is because that's when I have time to record it on a Friday, so it still kind of fits the Friday thing. And, you know, Greg logic. It works. Anyway, my channel, my rules. I wanted to take most of this video to talk about the Women's Prize because the winner is going to be announced on September 9th, which is this coming Wednesday. So I wanted to make most of this actually a Women's Prize winner prediction video and kind of just roll Friday Reads into it because, again, my channel, my rules, and I want to start with talking about the Women's Prize. Running through the books that are on the short list, there is Dominicana by Angie Cruz, which I have not read. Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, which I have read. The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel, which I have not read yet. Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, which I have read. And then there are two others that I do not own, and those are Weather by Jenny Offal and 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes, I believe. So of the ones that I haven't read, obviously I want to read The Mirror and the Light because I have a copy of it. I have read both Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies. If you follow along at all, you know that I found Wolf Hall to be a kind of difficult reading experience. It's a very dense book. It requires active reading, basically. But the further I got away from the experience of reading it, the more I have grown to appreciate the book and what it is doing. And Bring Up the Bodies, I think it's just fantastic. It focuses on a much smaller point in time than Wolf Hall. Wolf Hall is this really sprawling book that covers Thomas Cromwell's childhood and into his kind of political career as it was, as he moves into the court of Henry VIII and becomes his most trusted person. And Bring Up the Bodies is a much more concise, it's a shorter book, but also concise in terms of what it covers. It really only deals with the situation between Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII and ends with her assassination, which is not a spoiler because it's history. And The Mirror and the Light picks up, it is the final volume, and it kind of goes back to the structure of Wolf Hall from what I've heard, and you can tell it's a brick of a book. You could hurt somebody with this. And I've heard it's also really dense once again, but it is the story of Thomas Cromwell's ultimate falling out with Henry VIII, which of course ends in Thomas Cromwell's own execution, which again is not a spoiler because it's history. And so I'm really looking forward to reading The Mirror and the Light. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. Of the other two books, 1,000 Ships sounds interesting to me. It is another classic myth retelling. And I think right there is kind of where my problem with it comes in. It's another myth retelling. There have been a lot of those lately. So it's not that I'm opposed to it, but I think if it were to end up winning, it might jump up my TBR and catch my interest a little more. But as it is, it's probably the book on the shortlist that I would get to last. And let's leave it at that. And then the other one is Weather by Jenny Offal, which I would be very much interested in reading. I just don't happen to have a copy of it. I read The Department of Speculation, which was Jenny Offal's previous book, and really enjoyed that. And from everything I've heard about Weather, I'm really interested in getting to that. Dominicana, obviously, I want to read as well. I haven't gotten around to it. This one seems to be a bit of a Marmite book. There are people who love it here on BookTube, out in the world, and there are people who hate it and think it's terrible. And I would like to read it at some point to make up my own mind. I just haven't really gotten around to it. So this seems to be probably the most divisive book on the short list. I'd say it grabs my attention more than 1,000 Ships, but I would definitely say it is probably the most divisive. So let's get into I've talked about the ones I'm interested in reading. Let's talk about the ones I've read. Hamnet, if you follow along, you know I just read this past month and really enjoyed it. I loved it very much, and it is one of my favorite reads of the year. Girl, Woman, Other is a book I read in June as a buddy read with Lindsay's Book Life, and I really enjoyed it. So Hamnet is one of my top 2 favorite reads of the year. This is probably top 10. And I think that's where the distinction between them lies. But I really loved this book and a lot of the things that it is doing. I know there are people who don't like this, they don't enjoy the characters, or they don't enjoy the structure of it. It's kind of like a tapestry of 12 different stories about women and non-binary people living in the UK. And I just found it fascinating, and I loved everything that it did. So let's get into whether or not I think any of these books have a chance. And let's actually start with Girl, One Other, because it is in a very unique spot of all of them, because it co-won the Booker Prize last year. And I feel like things could go one of two ways. Either the Women's Prize wants to give Girl, Woman, Other the spotlight that it deserved by all rights, and give without having the Testaments tacked onto it, and kind of make history right by making it the sole winner of the Women's Prize for 2020, or it starts to feel like Girl, Woman, Other. And I know there are other books that came out last year, but for some reason, at least in my head, Girl, Woman, Other feels like a book that was last year. Like it's almost a surprise that it was even eligible for the Women's Prize this year, because it feels very much like something that should have been in contention last year, and it's not. But also, there's that question of, because since the Booker Prize, Girl, Woman, Other has gotten a lot of attention. Bernardine Evaristo has gotten a lot of attention. A lot of people have been seeking out her backlist, which I think is a wonderful thing. I think it's great both that people are discovering this book and that they're discovering Bernardine Evaristo's backlist. As I said, I love this book. I own another one of her books, Mr. Loverman. I would love to read Blonde Roots, I think is the other one. So I'm very glad about that. But there comes to be a sense of like, been there, done that with Girl, Woman, Other, and you do start to wonder, does it need any more attention? Now, I know a lot of people are going to comment, well, it should just be about which book is the best. And yes, absolutely, it should. But I don't think you can deny that politics and other weird considerations get into any kind of book award or movie award or any kind of award. There are always outlying factors. And especially, there are times when you think of wanting to reward something that hasn't gotten a lot of attention. There's always, traditionally, I love the Oscars. It can be hard to win a second or even a third Oscar, because traditionally there's, well, that person just recently, they won recently, or like you get that perception that Meryl Streep always wins. And so it comes into play. And that is the biggest challenge to Girl, Woman, Other as a contender for the Women's Prize. Hamnet is kind of the opposite. Maggie O'Farrell has been steadily building a reputation as a writer, but has not won a major award. I don't think she's really been nominated for a major award in the past either. So it still feels like this is kind of her coming out moment, and where she could get the attention that she, by all rights, probably deserves. This is the only book of hers that I've read, but I've heard great things about I Am. So she feels like an author who is in the moment breaking out with the release of Hamnet, and this could be a good time to give it to her. And then there's the fact that the book itself is pretty darn great. As you know, I love it. It's one of my top 2 books of 2020, at least so far. There's still a little bit of time for something to edge it out, but I don't know, it's going to be tough. So I feel like Hamnet is in a good position for some of the reasons that Girl, Woman, Other is potentially struggling with the rest of the field in the shortlist, which is interesting. Dominicana, like I said, is kind of a Marmite book, so I won't be surprised if it wins. The winner last year was An American Marriage by Tayari Jones, and that, I think, was similarly divisive. I've seen a lot of people who read it and just hated it. I'm one of those. And I've seen a lot of people who read it and loved it. I feel like Dominicana is a bit more divisive. There are more people that hated this book than there were that hated An American Marriage. But certainly there would be a precedent for something like Dominicana to win. And there's also the question of, it's an immigrant story set in the United States in the 1960s, which could be a story that people would be interested in seeing win a prize and talk about a little bit more. So I think it certainly has a shot at winning. Let's just say this. I won't be surprised if it wins, and I definitely won't be surprised if it loses. The Mirror and the Light is in a similar position as Girl, Woman, Other. It feels like this is now the third book in a series. Hilary Mantel has won 2 Booker Prizes. She's longlisted for the Booker Prize this year for this very book. So it starts to feel like she's already gotten a lot. So that is the hill that she has to climb if she is going to win the Women's Prize. Having said that, the majority of the feedback I've heard in the book is great. So again, I would not be surprised at all if it wins. It does have a steep road to get to victory, but I wouldn't be surprised if it pulls it off. And then of the 2 that I don't own, I think Weather is a pretty good dark horse. I haven't really heard too much negative about that book, so I think it definitely has a good shot at claiming the prize. I think if the Women's Prize wanted to lift up an author, I think like Angie Cruz for Dominicana or Jenny Offill for Weather would be great choices. Jenny Offill was one of the New York Times top 10 books of the year for the Department of Speculation, but I don't think I've seen her name in the mix for any major awards other than this, so it could be a breakout moment for her as a writer as well. 1,000 Ships, I think, is the biggest dark horse, and there's a packed field here between Hamnet, Girl, Woman, Other, Weather, Dominicana, the Mirror and the Light. I think it's always possible that when the field is crowded, the votes all get split and you end up with a really surprising winner. So there's definitely a path for 1,000 Ships, but I think it is also the least likely winner of the group. At least from my perspective. I could very well be wrong. I don't know. We will definitely find out. But I think it's the one that has the least shot. Of them, which one do I think has the best shot at winning? I'm going to go with Hamnet. Because here's the other thing. Girl, Woman, Other won a Booker Prize last year, so it's already a Booker winner. The Mirror and the Light is on the long list for the Booker Prize for this year, and Hilary Mantel has won 2 other Bookers for the other books in the series. Hamnet was the book that shocked most people by not being on the long list for the Booker Prize this year. So it's of those 3, which I would say are probably the heaviest hitters in this field, Hamnet is the one that is going to be Bookerless for sure. It's not even going to be close. Mirror and the Light ultimately may not make the shortlist, may not win, but it's in contention, and Hamnet is not. And I think that actually helps Hamnet, along with everything I said earlier, which is that Maggie O'Farrell is kind of on the cusp of a breakout moment with this book. And it would feel almost like a coronation for someone who has been putting in the work and getting attention over the years and is now ready to claim a spot in the big leagues, so to speak. So yeah, I think Hamnet is probably the one that is going to pull it out. I really wouldn't be surprised if any of the other books win, to be honest, but I think Hamnet is the one that has the best shot. If it's not Hamnet, I think it could be The Mirror and the Light. That's what I would put in second place. I really think the field comes down to Girl, Woman, Other, The Mirror and the Light, and Hamnet. And I think it's going to be difficult for The Mirror and the Light to claim a third Booker. The other 2 books that Hilary Mantel won the series, she's won back-to-back Bookers. So that in itself was a feat. I think a third one is tough. And I know I'm talking about the Booker a lot, but I think especially when the Women's Prize is being awarded so late in the year and it's in Booker season, I think it does become a consideration. And yes, it should be about the best book, but you have to take all of these other things into account. And I think Hamnet avoids the Booker issue and is also a really great book. So it's the one that I predict will win. If you disagree, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave them in the comment down below. Or if you agree, let me know. And if you have read any of these books, I'd love to hear what you're rooting for. If there's one that was on the long list and didn't make the short list, let's revisit that discussion as well, because I think they have a great field in the short list. And for me, I think you could say maybe Jacqueline Woodson's Red at the Bone is a little surprising that it didn't make it to the short list. But other than that, I think perhaps the right books made it to the shortlist, and it's a good field. It's an interesting field to talk about for sure, and I'm really interested in seeing what happens on Wednesday. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you think will happen when the winner is announced. Leave them in the comment section down below. So that covers the Women's Prize portion of my Friday Reads video. I'm going to move all of these to the side, and we can get on with the rest of the Friday Reads. But before we get into the next section of this Women's Prize prediction / Friday Reads video thing I've created, I feel like I should talk a little bit about the BookTube Prize, because I've mentioned that I have a lot of reading that I was supposed to be doing for the BookTube Prize, and I hadn't gotten to any of it in August, and now we're in September, and by the end of the month I would have to have my ballot in. I'm supposed to be doing the final round of nonfiction, and some of the books were unavailable until the end of the month, like the last half of the month, so I was starting to stress out about that, and every time I tried to read like Solitary or one of the other books on it, I was just stressing myself out with everything going on in the world, and I had this kind of block on it. So I came to a decision over the weekend and emailed Robert from Barter Hordes, I will link his profile down below, to let him know that I need to withdraw from the final round of the BookTube Prize, and he was very kind about it, and let me know that he has plenty of other judges. And I feel terrible, because especially because it is the final round of this to declare a winner, but at the same time, there's just so much going on in the world and in reading, and I had that a very minor reading slump in August, and it's just in my mental health space has been struggling with the idea of picking up the books for the final round. I do really want to read them, but there are 2 books about abuse, 1 book about Harvey Weinstein, a book about a guy in solitary confinement, and it feels like a lot for me right now, and I'm very appreciative of all the judges who are managing to get through them, but I couldn't do it right now, especially since, like I said, when looking at all of the reading priorities that I have put, or the initiatives and things that I have said have wanted to do, like buddy reads and things like that, that I've put on my plate, the fact that I'm going to get half of the books that I need to read in the last half of September, which does not give me a lot of time to do it. I felt like it was probably the smartest decision to alleviate some of the stress right now. I hope you understand that. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing what wins. And I'm really sorry that I won't be able to be a part of deciding who that winner will be, because I think the books that are in the final round for nonfiction all seem fantastic. And they are all still on my TBR, and I still have holds on the books, so when they come available, I'll try to get them in. But especially since I've talked about it so much, I wanted to let you know that is where I ended up with the BookTube Prize. So there you go. I did want to quickly mention just one thing. I hate to respond to one comment as if it's representative of the rest, but I think it is a conversation I've seen popping up on other channels a little bit. So after my wrap up for August, somebody commented to say that they always cringe when somebody talks about reading and then mentions an audiobook. And they called audiobooks a lazy way of experiencing a book. And I want to be delicate here, because I'm not trying to like push people to comment against that person or anything like that. But I think there is a larger conversation to be had here about being judgmental of other readers and trying to make people feel guilty about how they read or what they read. And I think that is still very much a problem in the book world. And I was guilty of it in my early 20s. You know, people would always say, or like someone I knew at the time said, "Oh, I read 2 to 3 books a week," and I was always like nose in the air, like, "Yeah, but you read romance novels. If I read romance novels, I could read 2 to 3 books a week as well, whatever." And that was really silly of me, but I've kind of grown out of that. But I think there is still a lot of that going on, and there's an idea that if you read a certain type of book or a certain genre or a certain author, then you're not a serious reader, and what you read doesn't count. Or apparently, if you listen to audiobooks, you're a particular type of reader and it doesn't count because you're not putting in the work. Which is also, and somebody pointed this out on that video, it discounts the reading experience of people who are differently abled. Like if you are visually impaired or dyslexic or anything like that, audiobooks are your best way to experience a book. So if you're calling it a lazy way to do it and saying that somebody's not putting in the work, then you're discounting a whole section of readers. But also, taking that out of it, people can read however they want. And a little bit of this was the question of wording. Yes, an audiobook is not reading, it's listening. That's fine. But we're all grown-ups here, and we all know that difference. So I think we can make the distinction on our own and still take audiobooks into the overall reading experience and be fine with that. So all I really want to say here is, let's have a kind and accepting reading environment for us and for people who don't read like us. And no way of reading is wrong. As long as you're reading, who cares? The most important thing to me is that people read. Doesn't matter what they read. It doesn't really matter how they're reading. Are they reading? Cool. And some people like to do in-depth analysis of books and do reviews and things like that. Great, cool. Not everybody has to do that. Some people just read one book and go on to the next, and that's fine too. So that's all. Just kind of a plea for understanding, non-judgmental reading, and acceptance of all fellow book lovers, and even people who aren't necessarily book lovers, just people who read. Let's not try to exclude anybody or their experience. Like I said, I'm not trying to point people toward the person who left a comment. I'm not trying to cause drama. I just feel like I've seen that basic conversation pop up here and there. Even in the area of guilty pleasures, like Kazan from Always Doing did a tag video recently where one of the prompts was, what is your guilty pleasure reading? And she kind of pushed back on the idea that any kind of reading or any kind of pleasure would be guilty. If you like romance, that's not a guilty pleasure. If you like cozy mysteries, that's not a guilty pleasure. You shouldn't have to feel guilty about those things. You enjoy them, so it's fine. And I very much agree with that. So I've just kind of seen this conversation popping up in small ways over the last week, and then that comment kind of made me want to talk about it a little bit. To sum up, audiobooks are fine. Ebooks are fine. Print books are fine. However you want to read is fine. No type of reading should be a guilty pleasure. You shouldn't have to feel guilty about anything you enjoy. And that's all I will say about that. Now, let's get into the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. I did finish one book this past week. I finished The Court Dancer by Kyung-Sook Shin, which I was listening to on audio, and I will not apologize for that. This was translated by Anton. I listened to it for Women in Translation Month. I didn't finish it during Women in Translation Month. I finished it in September, but that's fine. That is fine. I got a book that qualified, and I didn't make the deadline, but I got one in, and I'm proud about that. This was my second book by Kyung-Sook Shin. I listened to Please Look After Mom last year, and I really enjoyed that book. This is a very different book. It's based on the true story of a court dancer, hence the title, who ends up going from Korea to France and then back, and all of the court intrigue that she experiences. It's tempting to almost call it something of a romance, but it's not really. And it's a little bit about the political goings-on and Korea's relationship to the larger world. There's a lot going on in the book, and there's a lot going on in the book that I found very interesting. I think the flaw in the book is that it's a little too long, particularly the first half. The first half sets up a lot, and you meet a lot of the characters are going to, and you really get a sense of the relationships. So there's a payoff to all of the time that it takes getting you set into the story, but at the same time it feels like it takes a lot of time for the story itself to get going. Like you're halfway through the book before the court dancer, the main character, goes to France, and it feels like that is when, for me at least, that is when the book really started going, and it took half the book to get there. And a lot of the experiences that she has there are interesting and well played on Kyung-Sook Shin's part. For instance, she goes to the Louvre and she's really excited, but while she's there, she realizes that a lot of the items in the museum come from other countries and other parts of the world. And she asks the man she's with, but why are they here? And it makes a very astute point. And another point, there's this display of an African village that has been transplanted from Africa and placed in sort of a living diorama for French people to gawk at, and she is, of course, horrified. And this kind of thing happens, I think, a little too much, to the point where it's like, I get the point, but it's still really interesting. And because she is treated basically the same way, but in a micro form. Like, people are gawking at her because they don't know any Koreans, and they don't see a whole lot of Asian people in general, but people tend to assume that she's either Japanese or Chinese. And when she explains that she's Korean, they don't know anything about the country, which I think is largely still true. I think people tend to still assume that China and Japan are, and not know anything about the other countries within Asia. And so a lot that happens is interesting. I think it goes on a little too long, because by the time you get to the payoff, like I said, all of the work that Kyung-Sook Shin puts in pays off, but it still feels like it takes a lot to get there. But I enjoyed the book, and I'm looking forward to reading more by Kyung-Sook Shin. I have a print book on my shelf of The Girl Who Wrote Loneliness, and I'm looking forward to that. And I think this is a book that I definitely liked a lot, but did not love. And I hope that makes sense. And then I had one DNF from this week. I talked about it in my August wrap-up. It's Blonde by Joyce Carol Oates. This was a buddy read with Britta Bowler, and I already went into all of I talked at length about why we decided to DNF it and my thoughts on it in my August wrap-up, which I will link down below. So if you'd like to hear more about it, you can head right on there. It is something I am thinking I might want to revisit if there's time at the end of the year, but otherwise we shall see. And then there are the books that I am currently reading. I am still reading The Bass Rock by Evie Wyld. I did not actually make a whole lot of progress in that. I made more progress this week on audiobooks and finishing The Court Dancer, because I wanted to try to get that at least close to Women in Translation Month. So I only got a couple of chapters of The Bass Rock in. Still enjoying it. I'm still kind of waiting to get to the end to find out how I ultimately feel about that book. So TBD. Stay tuned for thoughts on that. I also started Love in the Time of Cholera. This is a buddy read with Courtney Ferreter. I will link her account down below. Check it out, please. We started this week and are going to have our first check-in over the weekend, and I am, I think, halfway through the first section of the book, so that's roughly 25 pages. We are going to be 50 pages in by the time we check in, and I will have more thoughts about this as I get further into it, but I'm excited to be reading more Gabriel Garcia Marquez. The only book of his that I have read is 100 Years of Solitude, which I absolutely loved. So very eager to see where this goes and what I think of it as I get further along. And I started an audio just last night of The Night Swim by Megan Goldin. I really struggle with mystery thrillers lately, and I've talked about that a fair amount. But so if you follow along, you already know all the reasons why. But I felt like I wanted to give this one a try because the main character has a true crime podcast that is very serial-esque, because it is supposed to be a true crime podcast that started a true crime podcast bonanza, which is what Serial did, and I feel like that's interesting. So the main character gets pulled into this cold case, and I thought that was kind of an interesting thing, because I love Serial, but I also really don't like a lot of the imitators of Serial that have come out. I think they can be very invasive and kind of glorify violence and things like that. A lot of people tend to find those things fascinating, but I think it goes a little bit far. So I'm approaching The Night Swim from that perspective, and it will be interesting to see if it is kind of a little bit critical of that, or if it's playing with that. It feels like a fresh approach to a mystery thriller, something I haven't really seen before, so I'm hoping I will enjoy it. I really did not like the first chapter, but once it changed to the perspective of Rachel, who is the host of the podcast, it started getting better for me. So I'm still early. It's still early. I have not gotten very far, because like I said, I started it last night before bed, and we shall see how that goes. But I started that just yesterday. And coming up this weekend, I am also starting Transcendent Kingdom by Gyasi. That is a buddy read with Erica from The Broken Spine. I will link her channel down below. Very excited to read that. I am a huge fan of Homegoing, and all of the buzz around Transcendent Kingdom has me very excited for that book. Really looking forward to it. Really, really, really looking forward to it. So that is what I've finished, what I've DNF'd, what I'm currently reading, and what's coming up I'd love to hear what you are currently reading, and if you have any thoughts about any of the things that I have mentioned in this section of the video. As always, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for that, and I will be back. Until then, happy reading.